Well, Kevin Feig is on the line and we're going to talk about his book, Walk You to Wealth. How are you today, Kevin?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Toby?
I'm excellent, thank you. So what inspired you to write a financial guide?
Sure. I'd say it's two things. So I'd say first and foremost, about 30% of the population is financially literate, right? So that's a huge gap. I want to do my part to sort of increase that number as much as possible. And from a personal inspiration perspective, I'd say it was my family. My kids. Where the title ultimately came from is I talk about this a bit in the book. My kids, when they have neighborhood friends over, they'll walk their friends home. Right. And it's just this simple gesture of just walking someone home. My hope is that, everyone at some point in your life, hopefully you too, Toby, has been walked home somewhere or walked someone else home, right? A girlfriend, a wife, a spouse, a friend. And that was the idea, right? Just trying to walk folks to a destination, right? To a better place financially.
So does it feel when you're reading the book like somebody is holding your hand throughout?
And that's my hope. What I tried to do is all these, personal finance books are a bit different. This is certainly a personal book, right? There's a lot of sort of personal stories that I try to tell about my family, my life, my journey, and that's my hope, is that it feels conversational.
And that's quite shocking, really, that only 30% of people are financially literate. What is the definition of actually being financially literate? Because I imagine most people know what money is and how to use it at the very least a basic level.
Yeah. So and that's some of the difficulty is it's everyone's certainly your point, Toby. We all the world revolves around money, right? You can't get through a day without sort of transacting in some way, shape, or form. But it's how much do you know, right? Do you know enough about saving? Investing is such a world, and that's where I spend a lot of time in the book talking about investing. Investing is such a complicated world, and there's so many options, right? And it's overwhelming. I think for folks every day, you think about different account types and different investments, and I think most folks, it's sort of analysis by paralysis. You don't even bother starting because it's just overwhelming. And that's my hope, is to sort of make it less overwhelming, simplify it, and hopefully help everyone.
So what quick tips have you got just now to make it sound not so overwhelming?
Sure. So the way the book is structured, it's around what I call simple steps, right? So the first step is save, right? And I use save sort of two different ways. So save yourself from debt, right? So credit card debt, especially, and save yourself also from the unexpected. So the unexpected always happens, right? We never think it's going to happen to us, but it does, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, it's not going to happen to me, but it does happen to you. And it's job loss. It's a trip to the emergency room. It's an accident. All these things, they happen. They happen to everyone. And saving yourself is preparing yourself for the unexpected, because it's going to happen. So I think for me, that's where I start. It's all about these simple steps, and save is that first step.
And saving helps you have a personal overdraft, really, doesn't it? As you say, in the event of job loss or a situation where you might run out of money. And I suppose it's just a good idea to save up money generally if you want to buy something big, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think some people often confuse, and that's where I try to talk about in the book, saving is something that's sort of readily available, right? It's, to your point, it's I have a large purchase I want to make in a few months, or I have an emergency that I don't know what it will be, but I know it will happen at some point. And so I want to be prepared for it. And then there's sort of investing, which is just different, right? Investing is where I want my money to go to work, and I want it to be sort of almost locked away for the long term. And I want to almost forget about it until I need it in 10, 15, or 20 years. And so those two things are often confused, but you want to make sure you're starting with saving, which is your foundation. Because if you start with investing and then the emergency happens, what you're going to wind up doing is selling your investments at likely the wrong time.
And I don't know how it is in America, but it's probably quite similar, where inflation is so high at the moment that if you've just got your money in a bank account, even a savings account with a pretty decent interest rate, you're losing money. So it's probably more important than ever to invest.
Yeah, absolutely. Inflation certainly, running rampant over the last, 2 years or so. And, you're never going to save yourself into financial independence. You're never going to save yourself into being sort of a millionaire, right? You won't be able to get there. So savings are critical, right? And they're critical because you need that foundation. But what you also don't want to do do is you don't want to think that that's how you're going to get there, right? If all your money is sitting in a savings account at a bank or in your checking account and you're not investing, you're never going to get there, right? You're never going to be able to keep up with inflation.
So when you get started with investing, what are the best companies and things to invest in? Because obviously, if you were to invest in cassettes maybe 30 years ago, you would have probably lost money by now.
Yeah, so you definitely, there's no, and this is what's difficult. So the way you allocate your money from an investment perspective is responsible for about 90% of your results. So how well you're going to do, right, depends on sort of, where you put your money, right? You put it in real estate, you put it in the stock market, where bonds, etc. And so it's responsible for 90% of your success. But there's no one size fits all, right? It'll depend on your age, it'll depend on when you plan on retiring, when you're going to need the money, etc. You definitely want a significant amount of exposure to the stock market. But what I would say is, to me, that doesn't mean picking individual stocks. Picking individual stocks is impossible. To do it successfully and to do it consistently is impossible. And if you are doing it consistently and successfully, you've just been lucky. And so I think you want exposure to the stock market, typically through low cost or in some cases free index funds. And those index funds will give you exposure not only to, if you're in the United States like I am, not only to the US market, but you also want to make sure you're investing globally. And I think a lot of folks tend to have, hometown bias, right? So if you're in the UK, you want to invest in the UK. If you're in the US, you want to invest in the US, but you tend to forget about the rest of the world. And so you want to make sure you have diversification across. But the stock market is the cheapest and easiest way for folks to get started. You just want to make sure you're starting with sort of, global index funds as opposed to starting with sort of individual stocks.
And how much money should you invest in your first investment?
Yeah, so I think it's important to start, right? So I talk about this a bit in the book in the sense that even, today, so, I've had my fair share of, I've worked in financial services for a long time. I'm a certified financial planner. So this is sort of my world, but I still don't know everything.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning. And that's where, if you're learning and experimenting, just start, right? And whether it's, $10, $15, $100, right? Money that you feel like in your situation, you can afford to lose, but you want to experiment with something new. So for me, over the last 2 years, I've been experimenting with crypto but I'm not going to run and put my entire portfolio into crypto. But if you want to learn, you want to experiment, same with the stock market, right? Pick an index fund and invest $10 or $15 so you can start to figure out how it works and then sort of move on from there.
Yeah. Is there somebody that you look up to in terms of financial autonomy?
There's no one person I look up to. I admire anyone that's pursuing it.
Yeah.
I think it's especially, I consider myself to be a sort of, I don't know, an average American, an average person, right? Those folks that are, teachers or firefighters, policemen, accountants, lawyers, folks that are doing their sort of chosen profession, but they're also pursuing this. They're pursuing sort of a better financial life for themselves and for their families. I admire anyone that's pursuing it. And I think it's, whether, regardless of your reasons, some folks, I want to spend more time with my family, right? That's sort of my why. A lot of folks like to travel. I hate traveling, but for a lot of folks, that may be why they want to get there, right? They want to be able to leave their 9 to 5 or leave their jobs. They can travel the world. So I admire the folks that are trying to learn, trying to figure this out, and trying to get to a better spot financially.
So have you got any more books that you're working on at the moment?
I'm sort of toying with the idea. So I have 2 young boys, 9 and 11, who at this point know more about managing money than probably most adults.
Yes.
And so I'm toying with the idea of sort of a book geared towards children. I do talk in Walk You to Wealth. I do talk about sort of for parents or folks that may have, younger siblings, et cetera. I do talk about sort of different ages and ways to sort of bring in financial literacy at a young age. Unfortunately, it's not a topic that's taught in schools.
Yes.
I never learned about it. I'm sure, Toby, you didn't either, right? It's not something that's taught in most schools, and that's a shame. But we have to figure out a way to close this gap. So I'm toying with that idea.
People always say that, don't they? It's never taught in schools, and it's like, no matter what generation you are, old people say it, and I wasn't taught it at school, which wasn't that long ago. So it seems to never change, and it ought to be, really.
Absolutely. I mean, I think about it as, I always I joke about this with my kids. So my boys will come home and they learn more about shapes than you would ever need to know in your life.
Yeah.
And I always tell them, no one's ever going to ask you about the rhombus, but yet you have homework on it every night. But this is important, right? Understanding the basics of spending, understanding the basics of saving, understanding. My boys will come home and last year, especially my youngest had an iPad at school, and he would come home and he'd be like, "Dad, the stock market was up today." And I was like, "Well, don't use your iPad for that," but I'm happy you understand. But yeah, no, it's not taught in schools. I think in the States, it's about 17 states now at this point at the high school level require a course, right? So I think we're hopefully starting to turn a corner, but it's a slow turn to your point.
Unless you need it for your job, nobody in their life requires to know how to work out the area of a graph. But
exactly.
Investment and making money, we all need to do that so we don't die.
Yeah, another good example, my kids are still, and we live in a sort of a great town, great school district, right? So I will look at this and I'm like, we're in one of the best towns.
Yeah.
My kids are still learning cursive. And I'm like, no one's writing script. Like, who's writing anything these days, right? Between the shapes and the script. And again, teachers have a hard job. My wife's a teacher, so I sympathize with teachers. But I think about, the curriculum and sort of what they're given to teach. And yet it has to change. We're spending this much time on shapes and cursive and skills and ideas that 90% of us will never need to know, but not spending time on something that 100% of us will need to know, which is understanding how to manage your money.
Well, where are we able to find this book, Walk You to Wealth?
So you're able to find it sort of anywhere books are sold. I think these days, I don't know who doesn't buy a book from Amazon, but certainly Amazon, Barnes and Noble, it is available sort of anywhere books are sold online.
And it's by Kevin Feig, but don't add an extra E at the end because that's that Marvel guy, isn't it?
No, that is the Marvel. Luckily, I think I get some clicks that way, so I'll take it, I guess.
Yeah, maybe people will think it's by him and you'll get loads of sales. Well, many thanks for talking to us today. It's been great to have you here on the show.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Toby.